All right, good to see you tonight. Get your Bibles open to 2 Samuel 9. 2 Samuel 9. And before we start 9, we're actually going to look at verse 18 of chapter 8, and so that somebody here can come up with an answer to this. So this was brought up to me last week. Said, "You forgot that?" You know, I said, "Yeah, I did on purpose. I forgot it." Do you remember chapter 8 deals with David being victorious over nations, also David being able to bring in the wealth of the nations, all of those fulfillments of prophecies that were made to the Messiah as well in his kingdom. And so you see David foreshadowing that with his victories as well. When you get to the end of chapter 8, there's an interesting little statement when he talks about in verse 17 and 18, those who were priests, and then Sariah was a secretary, and Benaiah the son of Jehoiada was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and David's sons were priests. There you go. So just so you know, David's sons were priests. So what's the problem? Yeah. Michelle goes, "What?" That's right. What's the problem with David's sons being priests? Yeah, wrong tribe. That's right. This is that's the tribe of Judah, and you can't be a priest unless you're descendant from Aaron in the tribe of Levi. Yeah, not even just the Levites, but a descendant of Aaron. So unique little statement there. There are. I didn't really look this up, but some have referred to other versions that just purposely don't even translate it as priest and put something else there. I don't know if anybody here has a version that does that, but yeah. Royal advisors. What perversion is that? Sorry. What version is that? NIV, okay. Royal advisors. As a matter of fact, well, it does. We like it a lot better, don't we? As a matter of fact, First Chronicles 18:17, the parallel text, gives that translation, but it is a different word. The word that's used here is the word commonly used, is always translated priest. And so that gives a lot of people, obviously a little problem trying to figure that out. Yeah. Chief ministers, New King James. There you go. So there's some of the translators are obviously as bugged about it as we are, and so they just decided, in comparing with First Chronicles, they decided, well, Chronicles is obviously right and Kings is obviously wrong, or Second Samuel is obviously wrong, and so we'll just translate it the way it was over in Chronicles. The only other answer that I could have to that as a possibility is, you'll remember there have already been occasions where certain ones have acted as priests who were not priests. Who can you think of already in 1 and 2 Samuel? Samuel. Yeah, Samuel does not descend from Levi. And so Samuel, of course, somebody could say, well, he was adopted by the high priest and therefore he could be a priest. And that's not a bad argument. But you do see that with Samuel. Okay? Anything else that might fit into that category, especially when you're just thinking about David? Pardon?
Saul being a priest. He acted like a priest.
He got whacked for acting like a priest. Yeah, not good. Adam?
David offered a whole bunch of sacrifices.
Yeah, Wayne brought this up a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't think a lot about it until I thought about it later after he mentioned it. But when they're bringing the ark into Jerusalem, it says David's offering sacrifices. I just kind of always read it and thought, well, he authorized, he had him offer it or something like that, but it does say David offered it. So the possibility here is that the writer is giving us, again, when you're looking at this from the standpoint of David being God's anointed and foreshadowing the Christ, that there's just little snippets of snapshot pictures of where the Christ Jesus is going to be both king and priest, and David here has a few little moments like this. He eats the showbread, as we saw back in 1 Samuel. So that's would be another one of those. At any rate,
It doesn't say that he was after the order of Melchizedek.
no, he wasn't that. Yeah, he certainly isn't in the Melchizedek priesthood. So you got anything to add to that, Michael?
Just lean on the First Chronicles.
You just lean on First Chronicles, yeah. So anyway, that's all Michael and I know about it, and if that's all we know about it, there's probably nothing else to know, I'm sure. But yeah, right. At any rate, that's the best I could find out on that. All right, chapter 9 and 10. You want these two chapters to fit side by side because they fit together. And there's some pictures here that we're going to see that fits together. So chapter 9 is all about who?
The son of Saul.
Yeah, son of Saul. What's his name?
Whatever.
Yeah, Mephibosheth. So we have Ishbosheth, one of the sons of Saul. Now we have Mephibosheth. There you go. And what has happened to Mephibosheth? Yeah, what happened with his feet? Okay. Yeah, when they're trying to escape the Philistines, a nurse was carrying him. How old was he? 5 years old, right? And she's carrying him, running out, and somehow she drops him, and so he's lame in his feet. I don't know, did he break both ankles or something like that? I suppose that I kind of think that all the kids I've carried around, that if I dropped them from this height, they probably wouldn't break both their ankles. But but something happened that he did, and harmed him enough that he was crippled. And obviously, they didn't have really good hospitals. So that left him in that situation. So that seems to be what's left of the house of Saul. And you will notice that David begins in verse 1 as saying, "Is there still anyone left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake?" All right, the word kindness is a unique word. It's a word used over 200 times, close to 300 times in the Old Testament, and it's translated differently depending on context. Anybody know what it is? Pardon? Yeah, hesed, and meaning what we would see as mercy in the ESV, loving kindness in the New American Standard Version. This is a covenantal love. It's the love that God talks about all the time that He has for us, and that He will not, His steadfast love, He will not take away. We've studied that already back in chapter 7. So God promised David He would not remove His steadfast love from him, and David made a promise about his steadfast love to who? To Jonathan, right. And so when you go back to 1 Samuel 20, you'll see that text in which David and Jonathan have a conversation, and Jonathan asks David to promise that when he becomes king, he won't kill him and he won't kill all of his family. Why would Jonathan be worried about that? Yeah, that's what you did. That's right. New king comes in. Former dynasty is a threat. Who knows what what son of the former king might rise up and to try to take the throne away. So you just massacre them all. You just get rid of them. And so Jonathan is requesting that David would not do that. And David promises, no, I will not do that. So he not only doesn't do it, but he promises that he keeps that promise and refuses to kill. And so instead he says, is there anyone left of the house of Saul that I can show some loving kindness to, I can show steadfast love to? And so there was a servant in Saul's house named Ziba. You see that in verse 2, and he calls for Ziba and says, who is there that I might do that? And he says, well, there's this kid named Mephibosheth, no longer a kid, he's grown up, but he's living up in the north country there, and you might you could get him. And so David calls him in. What are you thinking if you're Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth falls on his face, and which wouldn't have been hard for him to do with the crippled feet, but he falls down before him and says, I'm your servant, and tries to show David that he is certainly not a threat to him. And David, of course, tells him, do not fear. In verse 7, I'm going to show you kindness for the sake of your father. And he restores all of his land that was Saul's land. And guess who's taking care of the land? Well, Ziba was. And so Ziba was, we're going to see Ziba come up later on, and Ziba's kind of prancing around like he owns the land, but he doesn't own the land. And so David gives Mephibosheth back the land, and Ziba, as a servant, is called upon to take care of the land and to till it, etc., which Ziba has a ton of kids. And so that would not have been too difficult for him to do that. And then the crowning moment for Mephibosheth is David tells him, what? Yeah, you get to eat at my table. You're going to come and eat at my table all the time. So you are going to you're going to come and live in Jerusalem. You're no more going to live in somebody else's house, which he was doing. You can imagine he's probably pretty poor and can't do much work or anything. So he's been living with somebody else, and now David brings him to Jerusalem, brings him in his own household, sits at his own table with all of his sons. And you notice especially verse 11. And so Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. All right, can you make a connection now to the Messiah, to Jesus later on, and what Jesus does?
He redeems worthless people that
Yeah.
really have no value to the king, that he invites them to come here.
Yeah, he shows covenantal love and to people who are, well, in the book of Luke highlights this over and again, that Jesus is always going to the outcasts, those who are who've been rejected by society, and Jesus brings them in, and not only that, but even brings in enemies and who were former enemies, and makes them, which that's the house of Saul was a former enemy, and he brings them in and he makes them his own sons and daughters. Yeah. Wait.
The Lord's table, just that time when we come to the table of the Lord is a very strong.
That's right. So we come to the table together, all from different backgrounds, all from different walks of life, formerly enemies, anything. God brings us together as one. Remember how many times Jesus talks about that? He says in Luke 13, they'll come from east and west, and north and south to sit down at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then turns to the Jews and says, and you guys are going to be cast out. So he's bringing in Gentiles as his own sons and daughters, sitting around the table with him. This is a covenantal picture again, and the Lord's Supper is part of that covenantal picture that we have. So a lot of connections that you see here with the restoration, and David's so much different than any other king, and models what his future descendant will be. Okay, Michael.
I love verse 8.
is about himself when Saul's chasing him.
Yeah.
Back in 1 Samuel 24. So the reversal there of Saul's chasing David to kill him, and David is showing steadfast love to Saul's.
Yeah, just the opposite. Good. I was thinking about it. The first people who were converted to Jesus were those who tried to murder him, didn't murder him 50 days before. That same kind of thing where Jesus shows mercy to those who were his enemies, as all of us were. And so shows mercy to us, brings us in to the covenant. So you see those pictures like that. So the anointed one now restores the helpless, the outcast, etc. Okay? Any other thoughts, comments on chapter 9? Yeah.
I think this is just a great example of what it means to deal with integrity. That David had no reason to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, he had a reason that he promised to Jonathan. But beyond that, no one else living likely knew that he made that promise to Jonathan. I mean, eventually,
Exactly.
this would be written down, but no one else knew that this was said to Jonathan. Most likely, it had been said before David had been hunted across the plains and hills of Israel, and literally, Mephibosheth has nothing to offer. He can't.
Right.
He does. It's not like it's not like Jehu and those guys. Like, he didn't have some big army, or Abner. He didn't have some big army that could be. I'm going to give my army to you, David.
Yeah.
So treat me as a son or whatever. He couldn't even chase someone in battle.
Exactly.
But David does the ultimate, I would say, integrity-filled thing of not just showing him mercy in terms of not killing him, which would have been the standard. He showed him abundant mercy and gave him a seat at the table. And Jonathan never could have expected that David would have even considered it.
Yeah, it's like Mephibosheth wouldn't even have popped up in historical records at all without this. So, yeah, very unique. Okay, somebody else? All right, so chapter 10, and I want you to take a look at the contrast that we're going to see in chapter 10. So after this, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, I guess his name is, Hanan, his son reigned in his place, and David said, I will deal loyally with Hanan, the son of Nahash, as his father dealt loyally with me. Guess what word? Hesed, H-E-S-E-D, again, the steadfast love, covenantal type of love. And so he said, David's going, hey, his father and I had a covenantal relationship. I will send some messengers and express our sorrow for your death and try to console him. And of course, he sends the messengers, but very, very similar to one of the kings of Israel many years later. Verse 3, the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanan, their lord, do you think because David has sent comforters to you that he is honoring your father? Has not David sent his servants to you to search the city and to spy it out, to overthrow it? What king of Israel does that remind you of? Who listened to dum-dums? Rehoboam, right. Rehoboam, same way. Listened to some bunch of junk that younger guys tried to convince him of and led him into sin. So David does that, and so Hanan took David's servants, shaved off half their beard and cut off their garments in the middle at their hips and sent them away. So that's quite embarrassing, especially when you cut half your beard off. I mean, goodness, that's terrible. Yeah, yeah, junk. So, they were, and the scripture says they were greatly ashamed of this and all of that. And so David, of course, says, okay, well, if they didn't accept the steadfast love that I've offered them, then they can take the results of it, and they set up a battle here. And, of course, the Ammonites get whipped royally. They really get destroyed. And then the Syrians also try to join in, and the Syrians get destroyed as well. And so there's all that battle, but David's side wins, and you go down to verse 18. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David killed of the Syrians the men of the Syrians the men of 700 chariots and 40,000 horsemen, and wounded Shebach, the commander of their armies, so that he died there. And when all the kings who were servants of Hadadezer saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and became subject to them. So the Syrians were afraid to save the Ammonites anymore. So that fixes that. Now, what contrast do you see between chapter 9 and chapter 10? Especially implying to the Messiah as well.
Two different responses to
Good.
love and kindness.
Yeah, exactly. Two different responses to loving kindness. And you say those two responses still to this day. The loving kindness of God, covenantal relationship is offered, and some people humble themselves and are glad for it and accept it and are exalted to be sons and daughters at the king's table. And then there are those who don't want it and reject it, and they end up getting destroyed. So there's the Lord's kingdom. Sometimes we forget that the one who is over the Lord's kingdom is a king. This is not a president with a House of Representatives and a Senate and a Supreme Court where we all have to somehow work together and come up with solutions. No, this is a king. You either obey the king or you die. It's that simple. And that is the same way Jesus reigns as king. I'm offering you loving kindness, and you either come into this covenant or you are cast out, and you will not. And when Jesus gives the parable of the tares, remember, the parable of the weeds, as newer versions say, they gather the wheat with the tares, separate them. What happens to the tares? Burn them up. And these are called the children of the evil one. So there's one side or another, and he comes then. When he comes, he's going to separate those who are obedient and those who are not, and that's that. Yeah.
I see a difference also in who the person is listening to. Like, it doesn't say who the chef is giving his wisdom from, but the princes of the Ammonites were giving advice.
Okay, a little louder here.
Maybe those are not the wisest people that he should have been asking for advice.
Yeah, and that's just, again, that's why it reminds me of Rehoboam. Shouldn't have been asking these youngsters, whoever they were, advice on this. David, I mean, there's no sense in their advice. David had been loyal to Hunan's father for years.
He was lying.
Yeah.
He was lying to Ray.
That's the thing. This is a big bunch of junk. The fact of the matter is they didn't they're big macho people, and they thought they could whip Israel and whip David, and so they take him on, and that's the same thing Satan thinks. He thinks he can whip God, and he didn't. And so there you go. So you keep seeing these pictures of the anointed over and over again. All right, anything else on chapter 10 that you noticed or have questions about? Yeah.
Verse 12 is kind of interesting to me. I think Joab is a really complicated character because he's already committed cold-blooded murder. And yet we kind of have this sparkling moment for him where he's like, "You have good courage. We're going to fight this battle for our God." So he's going to keep being that complicated, where he's doing these good things. He's fighting these conquests for David, but in his heart of hearts,
He's got a bad side to him. And we're going to see more of that bad side as the book goes on. He is not one that you can really trust. But as far as a captain of the military, tough cookie. And so is his brother. They are, you'd really like to watch them in battle. They are experts. They're something else. And truly God, of course, was with them. Okay, good point. All right, anything else on chapter 10? All right, so chapter 11, wonderful chapter. No, not at all. But you notice here, chapter 11 is going to be a key division in the book. Really a key division in 1st and 2nd Samuel. Because from day one that we are introduced to David, everything goes David's way. David is always successful. David is with God. David is faithful. David he's the man after God's heart. He just does greatly, and he's always victorious, and he's always succeeding. And you just can't beat him. He's just fantastic. And so when you get to chapter 11, everything tips. So this is a pivotal point in David's life, as sin can be a pivotal point in our lives. So there is a lot to learn in this section here. Let's just start with some observations that you might have from this. We will notice. Let's start with the first 5 verses here. In the spring of the year, the time when the kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they ravaged the Ammonites still in this battle with them, and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, "Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" So David sent messengers and took her. And she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant." And I'm sure David went, not good. Okay, so what are some of your observations about this, especially concerning David here and what we've known of David all this time? What are some of the things that should stand out to us? Okay, that's right. The writer seems to make a big point of that. He doesn't just gloss over it. He seems to make a big point of, this is the time, springtime is here, and this is the time when kings go out to battle. And there was a battle going on, and David as the king is to go out to battle. That's one of the things that was even talked about in 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 20, when they wanted a king. The reason they wanted a king is they wanted a king who would go fight their battles. And David stays home. He's not there. And so he is hanging out at his own palace, and he doesn't seem to be terribly busy, does he? He's been lounging on his couch in the afternoon, and finally gets up and walks over on the rooftop and spots Bathsheba. Okay, so what else do you notice? Yes, sir.
Putting aside the big one, the adultery, it wasn't eating that. She was still unclean. So that's yet another thing.
Well,
but,
no, but that's not really brought up in the text. So it seems to indicate that she was done with her purification. So, yeah.
It kind of is reminiscent of the Israelites when God blessed them, and then they would start sinning.
Yeah.
And then it's just like power corrupts, but ultimate power corrupts absolutely. It's just a side effect of having tremendous power.
Okay. Good. Mara?
I like how one of the servants tried to stop him.
Yeah. How did he do that? What was he saying?
Don't you know this lady's
Yeah, you know who this woman is. Yeah, you know who she is once he said her name and all this. In fact, interestingly enough, when you check a few parallels, 2 Samuel 23, when there's a list of David's mighty men, Bathsheba's father is also listed, Eliam. And he's one of David's mighty men. Of course, Uriah is one of David's mighty men. Ahithophel is mentioned there, if he's the same as the counselor that David has later on. He's related to this whole business. So these are notable people. David knows once he says, that's Bathsheba. Is this not Bathsheba? You got this? And it seems that David should have went, oh, yeah, sorry. I blew that.
I think it mentions her purification because that would prove that this could not be her husband's child. You know, she had gone through the purification.
Yes. He's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah.
And then when
And he couldn't have relations with her anyway while she's until she's purified. Right.
it's obviously somebody else.
That's right. So how long is a woman considered unclean for sexual relations every month? How long? 14 days, yeah. So you're unclean during the menstruation, and then you're unclean a week later. And then you purify yourself, and then you are ovulating. That's exactly right. David should have known that scientific fact. So, yeah, she was right at the spot where the easiest time of the month she can get pregnant.
This is like an instance where his love of women can't be justified anymore. It's not for political gain. It's not for making a statement. It's not for this bringing people together like he can so conveniently always say. This is not for that.
Very, very good observation. Very good. When you look back at chapter 5 of 1 Samuel, verse 13, after already mentioning wives that he had already taken, and David took more, look at that, concubines and wives. So he's not just picking up wives, he's picking up concubines. I think that's an extremely significant point, that this gives you an idea of David's mind and thinking. Women is definitely a weak point with him. Solomon will be even worse, obviously, but he has by this time. He just says, and he got concubines and more wives. We already know about 5 or 6 before that. He could have 20, 25 wives, including concubines, maybe even more than that. Yeah, right.
I would think that that's very common. I was thinking along the same lines that I kind of seen this before, but as we've been discussing this, we're comparing David as a type of Christ. And I think it's interesting that we did know that he did not go to battle. And that's interesting to see, okay, we now know really what his weakness is. Was this the point in his life where he's tempted at his weakest moment? We see Christ going after the wilderness and fasting for 40 days and being tempted at his weakest, and yet overcoming Satan.
Yeah.
So we see how David is Christ is a better fulfillment.
Yeah, Jesus is able to thwart those temptations, keeps his purity. So before you talk about Jesus in this, obviously not a parallel, a contrast. But before you talk about Jesus, what is when we're reading 1st and 2nd Samuel, when we're reading actually Samuel, this whole book, what's our feelings as we see David become king? What's our feelings? We're finally a king that is just, and a king that rules righteously, and a king that isn't full of himself, and a king that follows God, and a king that doesn't go out and just do whatever he wants to do. And we're just thrilled. And all of the prophecies that we read in Deuteronomy, with how they were going to fall away and stuff, we finally have this little glimpse of finally. And then David sins. And the answer from God is what? Mankind will never be able to do it. I have to bring my own king.
And it's also a test of 2 Samuel chapter 7. God said, I'm not going to remove that stuff.
That's right.
Like, all right, God.
And if he commits iniquity, that's right.
So now's the time, like, look at what he's about to do, God. Are you still going to keep
Yeah.
your promise here?
Now you're going to keep your promise. That is exactly right, and that's a very, very important part of this as you look at it. Okay, so now David does what? Most of you know the story, right? So after this, David, instead of, what should he have done? Make confession of sin, own up. Why would that have been so tough? I mean, it would be tough for anybody, but why is it especially tough for David?
Can you imagine his mighty men coming back and his wife branded by the king, and he's fighting for him?
And Uriah is one of the top men listed in chapter 23 of his mightiest men. He has killed one of his best guys. And you see the integrity of Uriah when he brings him back and says, go home and wash your feet. Now, you think his feet hadn't already been washed when he went in before the king? Yes, of course it had. But it was just a way of saying, you know what I mean. Go visit your wife. And Uriah will not do it. My men are out there fighting and battling. I am not going to do that and have the comfort of my own home and my wife. I'm not doing that. And then he gets him drunk and tries to get him to do it. And you can't even get a drunk Uriah to do what a sober David is doing. And so it is it just becomes more and more disgusting as you read it, and how David could do this. Look how far he has fallen. I mean, the last chapter, he's on the top of the world. He is the king of the universe. And look how far he has fallen. And once he does this sin, then the sins begin to multiply as he rationalizes, hides, covers up, does all of those things. So what are some of our lessons from that? What are some of the things that are kind of obvious on the table that we should always think about? Yeah.
I would say that any amount of power goes to people's heads really quickly, obviously.
Yeah, sin destroys. And this sin especially, remember what the Apostle Paul says about this sin, 1 Corinthians 6? He says, every other sin is outside the body. This sin is against one's own body. Interesting text, if you notice in Proverbs chapter 2, I would really urge you to keep, when you come to this particular kind of sin, to keep this passage always before you. Proverbs chapter 2. This so fits David, beginning at verse 16, talking about Solomon talking about getting wisdom. And he says in verse 16 of Proverbs 2, so you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. Of course, in this case, it's David who's in that position, who forsakes the companion of her youth and forgets the covenant of her God. For her house sinks down to death and her paths to the departed. None who go into her come back, nor do they regain the paths of life. Paraphrase way of saying that, you commit this sin, you will never be the same. You will never be the same. You will destroy something inside you that you will never regain. Cannot emphasize that enough. I've mentioned this before, but in 50-some years of preaching, on average, churches that I have been in or whatever, somebody has an affair, commits adultery about every 3 years on average, and right in the church. So it's a serious error. Somebody, Adam.
David's lived a life that before this we really had no glimpse of him struggling with sin. He certainly did. That is only logical.
Of course.
But nothing that would hint at that. And if you ask someone, hey, how likely do you think David is to, and they start listing off the things that he does here, and people are like, you're crazy. Like,
No, he would not do
saying
that.
that is treasonous. Like, whether we're thinking about preachers or elders or deacons or other people that serve amongst us, that we may be tempted to think like, oh, if we use the term, they've arrived. They don't struggle with these things. They do, and we shouldn't think that anyone among us doesn't face sin every day and isn't tempted by it,
No.
just like David was, and that David didn't run from this sin; he ran to it.
That's right.
He sent people to go get them.
Yes.
It's hard to run it as sin, harder than that.
That's right. And you make excellent point. The first thing we should really put in our minds and keep it in our minds is if David commit this sin, any of us can commit this sin. And it means being very, very careful. When you read Proverbs 2, Proverbs 5, Proverbs 6, Proverbs 7, there's all those, like 4 chapters here that warn about this. And the warning is always the subtleness of it and how it leads up. Now, you think about David and what led up to this. So he's collecting women. Now, wouldn't you think, this is the human way of thinking, wouldn't you think if you have collected 20 to 30 women that you would have satiated any of the lustful feelings that you have? But in fact, the collection of women like that increases the problem. It doesn't decrease it. It doesn't solve the problem. The degraded mind thinks a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit different, something like that. So that's the addiction of pornography. And yet what has happened is he only increases his lustful desires. He doesn't satisfy them. So that's something extremely important for us concerning any sin. It's foolish to think that when I'm feeling some strong desire for something that I shouldn't have or shouldn't do, the taking a little taste maybe to think maybe I can just satisfy it without. No, what you do is you inflame it. Don't do that, Wayne.
The passage says, and sin waxes worse and worse. And you think about the progression that we had that ended in murder, and how much the progression of sin ends in murder now of innocent babies in abortion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a progression, and you get desensitized.
Yep.
He was desensitized.
That's right. He gets desensitized. It's a very good point.
To me, one of the big pictures is that David is an Israelite, Uriah is a Hittite. David's supposed to be the one
Yes.
following God for the whole world.
Good.
And Uriah is right here.
Coming out of.
He's blameless in every way,
Yeah.
being full of integrity, and David is doing the exact opposite. So, God forbid that happens to each one of us, where somebody in our lives is not a Christian is more righteous.
Yes. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10:12, let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Very, very dangerous. Listen finally to C.S. Lewis in his Screwtape Letters. The demon Screwtape is writing to his nephew, Demon Wormwood, instructing him how to lead people into sin. And he says, it does not matter how small the sins are provided, that their cumulative effect is to edge the man away from the light and out into the nothing. Indeed, the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope soft underfoot, without sudden turnings, without milestones, without signposts. So the gradualness of bringing David through the women that he had already have and get him desensitized to that, to where he finally sees a woman who the scripture says is very beautiful. By the way, only woman in the Bible that's referred to as very beautiful. Rachel was beautiful and Rebecca was beautiful and all, but very beautiful. So he goes, need one more. That was Solomon. All right, very good, guys. Pick up there next week.